we have been working our way through important moments in the life of that guy. Who's that guy? Moses. I mean, that's Charlton Heston, but Moses. So we've been working our way through that. But as we get started in that, who here can join me in the geek side, and who's a sci-fi fan? Like as a category of things. Okay, I've got a few people. Do I have any Doctor Who fans in the room? Or am I all alone? I'm all alone. It's okay. So Doctor Who is, for me, like great because it's sci-fi and it's British. And British people are inherently funny and interesting on TV. So Doctor Who is this show in England that's been running for 60 years on and off. And this guy's an alien who travels in time and does all sorts of things. I had Faith watching it with me for a while. She checked out when there was a sentient piece of skin that talked to people and it was stretched on a poster frame. She was not really a big fan of that. I think she was also creeped out by the possessed mannequins, but that's a whole different episode, literally. But one of the interesting things in Doctor Who, so this guy can travel in time and do whatever and go forward and backward. He goes to all sorts of interesting places. So in the most recent season, he becomes a she, but that's less weird and less political than it sounds. But there's this concept in the show of fixed points in time. Like there are these events in history that he can't alter. He can't let change because if that moment changes, all of time will unravel. And that first comes out in an episode where he's in Pompeii and his companion wants to save the people in Pompeii from the exploding volcano. And he explains that if they save the people in Pompeii, all of humanity will cease to exist. But there's this concept of a fixed point in time. And I know, like most of you have already glazed over, it's fine. You don't have to like the weird show. But here's where I'm going with this. Like, there are these moments in our life, in like real life, that are very similar. So the Bible tells us this story from Genesis to Revelation. It's one story. I know sometimes it doesn't feel like that. Like some of you have done this thing where you start reading in Genesis on January 1st, and you're going to read the Bible through in a year, and you are excited, and then you get to Leviticus, and you have 14 chapters of how to kill goats to appease God. And somewhere along the way, you get lost in the amount of barley and grape juice you're supposed to leave on the seventh day of the Festival of Tents, and you're done, right? But it is all connected. There's this story from Genesis to Revelation. It begins with God, it ends with God, and it shows in the middle how we mess things up and how he fixes that. And there's these really important moments along that story that are essential, that you could almost call fixed points in time. And tonight, we're going to look at one of those. So the whole Bible points to Jesus, and he fulfills a lot of things that happen in the Old Testament. And one of those is a thing that he says, even in Matthew, there's this line where Jesus quotes this line of, "Out of Egypt I called my son." And this is a little thing that first comes out in Exodus 4, where God is talking about Israel. He calls Israel his son, and he calls him out of Egypt. Now, when we get forward to the life of Jesus, it's going to be because Herod's trying to kill him as a 2-year-old. Because, all good kings kill babies. It's the cool thing to do. But Jesus, literally, his family takes him to Egypt so he doesn't get slaughtered, right? And Jesus ends up coming back from Egypt. But this moment, this actual real event in the life of Moses, that we're going to look at tonight, he had the chance to do the wrong thing. Moses could have walked away, and all of God's plan would have unraveled. It was a real thing. It was really crucial in the coming of Christ. But it was a real choice that Moses had, which is why it's a big deal, because a lot of times we face big choices, we face small choices, and they're real choices, and they can affect things. And sometimes we find that to be super awesome, and sometimes we find that to be super overwhelming. But choices are huge. So, just to play a little bit of catch up, we have this guy named Moses. We all know who Moses is? Yes? No? Maybe? Right? His name in Hebrew is Moshe, which is super fun. Moshe. He sounds like an anime character. So he's born at a time when the Israelite babies are supposed to be killed. His parents hide him for a couple of months before he gets too big to hide. His mom sticks him in a basket and sticks him out on the river. You're thinking that why is she going to win the Mother of the Year award for that? But it was her best option, right? In the river, he had a chance, and she was hoping to go back and get him out. But he ends up growing up in Egypt. What happens when he turns 40? We remember this from a couple weeks ago, or maybe just from reading. What? He murdered someone. So Moses goes out. He sees an Egyptian beating a Hebrew slave. He's not a fan of that. I think we can all get on board with him there. But his way of solving the problem is he kills the Egyptian, buries him in the sand, and goes on about his day. I guess he goes looking for a churro or something. And the next day he sees two Hebrews fighting. And he's like, dude, don't fight. And they're like, ooh, you going to kill us like the Egyptian? And what does he do? What? I heard somebody. He runs to the desert. So at 40 years old, he's a runaway. He's escaping his murder charges. And he ends up at this shepherd's well. He meets a girl. It's every Hallmark story. They get married and he tends sheep for 40 years in the desert. It's really great times. Hallmark has 3 versions of this they play at Christmas, I promise. It's all the same thing. So at age 80, he's with the sheep. I mean, this is pretty impressive. Like this 80-year-old man is out with the sheep in the desert. And he sees a bush. Now, I mean, bushes are bushes. Anybody here just love bushes? I don't really have a feeling about them either way. That's pretty impressive. Nice shrubberies, a stair-step effect. So he sees this bush and it's burning up and it's not on fire. And we talked about this last week. Brian did a great job of kind of unpacking that for us. And God commissions him to go back to Egypt, the place that he's a convicted murderer, to free the Israelites. Last time he tried to do that, he ended up running away for 40 years and taking care of sheep. Sheep are smelly. Sheep are boring. Sheep are dumb. Maybe that's why the Bible calls us sheep so much. So he goes back from the bush. He gets his father-in-law's permission to return to Egypt. So this is an 80-year-old guy, and his father-in-law is still alive, so this is fun. Why on earth do you think Moses goes to the trouble of getting his father-in-law's permission to do anything? This is a part of the session that we like to call interactive, where I ask a question and you give an answer. It's okay if it's wrong. Like Andrew and Brady are used to being wrong all the time, and we still love them. Why do you think he goes to the trouble of asking his father-in-law, who's got to be like literally 100, for permission to go somewhere? Can you imagine like two dudes at the nursing home, like they're in their rocking chair and they're drooling and they're eating pudding at their 3 o'clock dinner? They're like, hey, Jethro, I think I'm going on a trip. You okay with that? Like, this is a little bit odd. So, there's a couple reasons. First off, he's working for Jethro, right? He is a shepherd for Jethro. That's also like still a fun name, right? Who doesn't like Jethro? So his father-in-law Jethro, he's working for him, and all of Moses' family is working for him. So if Moses takes the wife and the kids and leaves, he's taking a lot of Jethro's workforce. So, and because he's family, he wants to leave on good terms. Now, I know all of our families don't always do things on good terms, but Moses, he's a good guy. He's learned a lot in his 40 years. He's trying. So he takes his family, he takes the staff that he had at the bush, and he heads back to Egypt. And God tells him, you can go back. The people who wanted you dead are dead. Well, of course they're dead. It's been 40 years. And God straight up tells Moses that Pharaoh is not going to do what God says. So again, let's go back. God has spoken to you from a burning bush. This is cool. This is scary. He's told you to go to the most powerful man in the world and say something the guy's not going to like. And he's not going to listen to you. Let's have some real talk. Who would sign up for that mission? Yeah, exactly. So he goes, and there's this weird side story in Exodus 4 where God almost kills Moses. Go and read it for yourself. Very bizarre. Don't have time for that tonight. And then God sends his brother Aaron, also old. Aaron was alive and like walking around when Moses was in a basket. So Aaron is like 90. So God sends Aaron out into the wilderness to meet Moses. They meet up at the same mountain as the burning bush. And that is where the Israelite elders meet up with them. They have a worship service. And that's where we're going to pick up tonight. So Exodus 5 reads, "Later, after all of that, Moses and Aaron went in and said to Pharaoh," who's Pharaoh? Let me rephrase that question. Pharaoh is who? What is his role in the world? King of Egypt. Why is that important? And that is hugely important. Egypt ran the known world at the time. So like when this is happening, like there's still people in the steppes of Asia and there's people in North America, but as far as like people and civilization and the known world, Egypt ruled the show. And so Moses and Aaron went in and said to Pharaoh, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Let my people go so that they may hold a festival for me in the wilderness." Now we're used to like the Ten Commandments movies and Prince of Egypt where it's like, "Let my people go." Pharaoh's like, "No." But we always forget this part of why they're supposed to go. They're supposed to go so that they can go out and worship. Now this is huge. Pharaoh's this important guy. You couldn't question him. You could just beg him. And he could do whatever he wanted. Cade could walk in and be like, "Hey, I don't want to make as many bricks today." And Pharaoh could be off with his head. Because Pharaoh was treated as a god. They actually believed that Pharaoh was a representative of the gods, that he himself was divine. He could do whatever he wanted. But it was his duty as the king to be available to everybody. So Cade really could like take his turn in line, take a number like at the Publix deli, and go in and see the king. He was just really scared of what the king may or may not do. So if Adam steals Cade's goat, Cade can go straight to the king and ask for Adam to get his goat back. So, ooh, my battery died. That's fun. So, I put it over here. So they go in. Moses conquers his fear. He had told God he was afraid and he had a right to be. He's this known murderer who has fled. He's presenting a confrontational message. But he conquered his fear and he did it anyway. So how often do we fail right there in that moment? Right? Where we are afraid of something, so we just shut down. We're afraid of something, so we go the other way. We're afraid of something, so we stop. Maybe we know the person we should share with, or the person we should apologize to, or the thing we need to do, or the person we need to break up with, or the language we need to change. I mean, you name it. We could pick a long list of things. But because we're afraid of the consequences, we stop. I mean, what would happen if we took the scary step and obeyed? Well, let's find out. He presents God's demand, and it's interesting. It says, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. This is not what the Lord, the God of Israel, requests. It's not, "It would be really great if," or, "Gosh, Pharaoh, you're such a nice guy. Do you think you could?" They walk in and make a demand of the most powerful guy. "Let my people go." So Pharaoh says in verse 2, "Who is the Lord that I should obey him by letting Israel go?" I don't know the Lord, and besides, I'm not going to let Israel go. Or if we change that a little to go a little bit closer to the original sentence, it was, "Who is Yahweh that I should obey him by letting Israel go?" I don't know Yahweh, and besides, I'm not going to let Israel go. Pharaoh thinks he's a god. Pharaoh is used to worshiping all sorts of interesting gods. You had Horus and Ra and Osiris and Anubis and all these like half animal, half human gods that were not aliens from the Stargate, but were actually like these weird combo things. And he knows all of them. He makes sacrifices to them. He sends servants to placate them. He's never heard of Yahweh, and he's not really interested in letting the people go. So, if you were Moses and Aaron, what would you do right then? "Hey, let my people go." No. What would you do? This is like a real question you can answer out loud, I promise. This is not a trick question. I'm not waiting to zap you, although that would be fun if I could do that. Say what? Luke, we've really got to work on a filter for you, buddy. I would probably have been like, "Okay, I didn't die," and run. But in verse 3, they say, "The God of the Hebrews has met with us. Please let us go on a 3-day journey into the wilderness so that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God, or else he may strike us with plague or sword." So here they answer, they push back. I say God of the Hebrews. Hebrews was like a way of talking about them like as an outsider. It would be kind of like talking about someone from Arkansas as being a redneck rather than saying they're from Arkansas. It's like it's the outside term. And they stand their ground. So, what is Pharaoh's response? The king of Egypt in verse 4 said to them, Moses and Aaron, why are you causing the people to neglect their work? Get to your labor. Pharaoh also said, look, the people of the land are so numerous and you would stop them from their labor. So there's this really subtle little thing right here. In verse 2, he's called Pharaoh, his title, his role in life. In verse 4, it says, the king of Egypt said to them. Pharaoh was treated as a god. And there's this nice little subtle slight where God calls him the king of Egypt instead of a false god. He puts him more in his place. It reminds him who's really going to win this battle. King of Egypt said to them, Moses and Aaron, why are you causing the people to neglect their work? So Pharaoh has questioned God's authority, and he wants his people going back to work. So what happens next? Well, Moses and Aaron don't die. Well, not immediately. I mean, they eventually died. We'll talk about that next week. But Pharaoh punishes Israel for this distraction. Anybody know what happens next in the story? He takes away the straw, but doesn't change the number of bricks they have to make. So this is very exciting. You may have covered this in world history. To build things, they took mud and shoved straw in it and baked it in the sun, and then they would build things. Much like now we take concrete and put rebar in it and make all sorts of things like bridges and skyscrapers and doghouses. So he takes away the straw. He takes away the reinforcement. So the people have to make the same number of bricks, but they have to take time to go get the straw and do it. So they double their workload, and they're already not paid, and they're not big fans. So it seems like Israel is getting punished for Moses obeying God. But the story isn't finished. Like in Exodus 6:1 it says, but the Lord replied to Moses, now you will see what I will do to Pharaoh. And then come the plagues. So often, things don't go the way we think they should, right? Has anybody had everything go perfectly the way they wanted it to all the time? Fair enough. But so often, we forget we are not at the end of the story. In fact, I was talking about a friend about this concept a little last night. So here's the deal. We covered this. I forgot I had this slide there. Look at that. This is why I don't often make slides, because I forget I have them and then I get sidetracked. So World War II was ugly and nasty, and still to this day, more people died in World War II than any other recorded conflict in history. And at some point, it looked like Germany was going to win. This was bad because Germany was doing things like, sticking people in furnaces and burning down whole parts of town and, I don't know, like conquering countries and generally unlikable things. So finally, the Allies mount this operation that we call D-Day. I'm not going to go into all details, but they did a lot of work. They did a lot of buildup. Like for months, they had inflatable tanks set up in fields around England to throw off the enemy spy planes. They had all sorts of diversions set up all over the countryside of England to make the German generals think they were coming in a completely different place than they were. In fact, they were so effective at that deception that one of the famous German generals went on vacation the day that the Allies were actually going to invade. And so on the morning of what we now call D-Day, in 1944, I believe, I've gotten my brains jumbled today, they have 10,000 boats that are about to cross the English Channel. 10,000. So that's like one boat for every 5 people in Plant City. Or one boat for every 5 people on the first day of the festival, right? So lots, and they're all going to cross the channel, and there's no going back. And you could argue it's divine providence that morning the entire English Channel was covered with cloud cover, and the Germans couldn't see them coming until the last second. And most of the men were in landing crafts like this, that would hit the beach, the front would flip down, and everybody would pour out while machine guns from all over the beach would mow them down. Tens of thousands of 18-year-old, 17-year-old, 16-year-old men getting just shot down. Now, eventually, they were able to take the land. There's all sorts of interesting stories that go in with this, right? But eventually they were able to take the beach, move into Germany, and eventually we don't speak German today because this was successful. But here's where I'm going with this. The people in those boats were mostly either 18-year-old boys or 16 and 17-year-old boys who had lied about their age because they wanted to be part of the war. It may sound sexist, but the girls didn't come later. That was probably good because they had a higher survival rate. But these are 16 to 18-year-old boys that have no idea what's about to happen, right? They've left home. They've gone to 3 months of boot camp. They've been shipped across the ocean. And when that door falls down, they don't know what's coming next. And a good portion of them died on the beach that day. They were part of something that started before them and ended after them. But what they did in that moment changed all of history. I mean, they started at a horrible part in that story. And most of them didn't see the end, but the end was coming. Moses shows up at this really important part in the story. He doesn't know what the end is, and he is going through as much fear as they were because he could be shot down standing where he is by one of Pharaoh's guards before he walks away from the court. Right? We face situations in our lives, not necessarily every day to this level, but we are all going to face hard moments, scary moments, some that are forced on us by life, some that God sets before us, and we're going to have to decide what we're going to do. What's our part in this story? Are we going to trust what he's doing that's happening after us? We may not get shot down. I hope that doesn't happen to anyone. But we don't know what's coming next. We all have hard moments that we have to decide what we're going to do. If Moses can cross the desert to tell the most powerful man known in the world what God said, I mean, surely we can cross the cafeteria, right? Even when it's scary, we can obey God. Even when we don't like the outcome, God is in control, and he's not done yet. There have been lots of times in my life that I have not liked the outcome. But later, I'm thankful for what God did. The summer that I served in New York as a summer missionary, and you're like, who wouldn't love that? New York was we were supposed to be able to apply for 3 options in that missions program, and I wrote it in as my 4th. It wasn't even I wasn't even trying to go to New York. I had auditioned for 2 things that failed. Anybody ever had a failed audition? Super fun, right? And my 3rd choice was Australia, which I didn't get, but a friend of mine at school who always got everything got to go to Australia. And I ended up going to a place that I wasn't even super interested in to go work with children, which wasn't my favorite thing. I thought children were like these little things that you keep away. But God used that in a huge way in the way he shaped me. And that's not like scary, horrible, like looking down the barrel of a gun or a man with a sword, but I was not happy for a while. I was very disappointed. Nobody likes being told no. Nobody likes being told we want somebody else instead of you. But God was in control. He wasn't done yet. So I guess the question I want us to kind of stick in the back of our mind tonight, this is not an answer out loud question, is what has God been telling you to do? What are you afraid of happening if you obey him? Or maybe let me rephrase that. What might he do if you do obey? Let's pray. Father, I thank you that when you give us hard moments, you walk with us in them. I thank you that when you give us hard moments, you're giving us a chance to be part of your plan. And God, I pray that when you give us hard moments, we can trust you with the outcome, even if it's not what we would have picked. So God, I pray that you would give us strength and courage to follow, to obey, and to trust you. And even when things are awful and not what we would pick, and we can't see anything good in them, I pray that you would give us the faith and the trust to get to the other side and see what you've accomplished, even in the things we don't like. God, as we come out the other side of what has been a crazy time in life for all of us, I pray that you would help us to see your hand. But more importantly, I pray that you would help us to share that with the people around us who need the same hope that you have given us. It's in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen.